opportunity to talk about open science and to exchange about open science between young scientists, because young scientists are, on the one hand, really keen to share our work, to collaborate more, to, in a way, to create better science. But on the other hand, we're also sometimes concerned about the implications, and we're conscious of potential implications, that is, financial implications or effects on our career or reputations as scientists and so forth. So there is a lot of confusion also still around open science, and that makes it even the more important to discuss how we can make progress and how we can move forward from here. And it's really important to get the voice of young scientists heard in that respect. So today it's really a pleasure to facilitate this discussion between young scientists, and the workshop is organized by the Global Young Academy, which is an academy of young scientists, which includes also social sciences and the humanities. It's an academy of young scientists that have been selected for their scientific excellence, but also their service to society. And I think, like, really moving forward on open science and really helping to change society is really something that we're passionate about. And so we're very happy to help drive forward this discussion. This event is organized in partnership with UNESCO, and UNESCO is currently taking a very important initiative to facilitate a global consensus on open science. And we have here with us Persic from UNESCO, who is actually playing a key role in this UNESCO recommendation, and she will say a few words to us. Anna.
Thank you very much, Koen. It's really, really good to be here. It's impressive to see the amount of young scientists from Global Young Academy and beyond, let's say, who are very, very interested in the open science movement. And we are very happy to have this opportunity today to discuss with you all about what your vision of open science is, what you're feeling about the opportunities of open science is, and mostly what are the challenges that you can see with open science in your different disciplines, in your different roles, in your different regions and countries. And just to try to understand, where we all stand, what do we all understand by open science, and how can we move this forward? I will have a longer presentation on where UNESCO stands on open science and why we, as a UN agency for science, education and culture, have embarked into building this global consensus on open science. But what I can say from the beginning and right now is that the member states of UNESCO, the governments that make up the organization, from the beginning, they said that what is really, really important is to make sure that young scientists are included in this consultation and in this conversation that we are having. Is really important for now and for the future, and therefore young scientists are those who really need to be part and parcel of what we want to build up for the future for open science. Again, as I said, I will have a larger presentation on that, just to let you know that this workshop or this conversation is part of a larger consultation process, and it really builds into our understanding of what open science is, what it means, and what it should be. We are very, very much looking forward to all the inputs. We are here to listen. We are here to understand what your perspectives are, possibly to respond to some questions. Of course, we don't have all the answers. As Koen said, it is still an area where there is a lot of open question marks, and it's important to talk about it to understand what the unanswered parts still are and try to come to some of the solutions together. But really from the UNESCO perspective, we are extremely happy to be doing this consultation together. Hopefully it's one in a series. We really do want Global Young Academy with us throughout the process of building this global consensus, but also once the consensus is built, we do want Global Young Academy and all its members as part of the community of practice that will actually put in place some of the recommendations that we will have for governments and other stakeholders. So I think I'm gonna stop here. because we have a pretty full agenda and not that much time. And I'll give the floor back to Koen to continue the session.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you for explaining the bigger context also for UNESCO, that this is part of like a longer set of meetings. And it's actually also for GYA part of a longer set of meetings. We're coming out of our e-AGM, our virtual annual meeting, and we are moving next week into our e-conference or virtual conference. And Robert Lepenies from the GYA Executive Committee will say a few words about our conference, which is in a way starting today as a pre-conference workshop, but really starting next Monday. Robert.
Yes, hi everyone. Delighted to be here, as this marks not just the beginning of this workshop, but also, as Koen said, the start of the annual conference that we are launching. Usually we have the annual general meeting and the conference at the same time, but we do this a little bit differently, and doing this differently also means a step towards maybe open conferencing, conferencing that is more inclusive, that people can attend to regardless of visa issues or other responsibilities. And we are decided to try out new things, but we need your engagement, we need your input, and we need you to come and visit us. First, in our website, you can still register in case you haven't already, and get involved. Monday, the first videos are starting. Some of the things are live, but most of it will be asynchronous, so people can watch at their own time. Please participate, please join the document, start discussing. The first two topics are going to be about COVID and health, of course, and the second one is about diminishing resources. And we are delighted to be welcoming you at the first e-conference of the GYA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, for the introduction of the conference. So everyone sign up and come and visit us again next week. Before we start the session with the keynotes, I will have a few housekeeping announcements to make. And maybe first of all, I will say a few words about the session organization. So we have two fantastic speakers, and we will get to them in a minute. And that part of the workshop will last about 1 hour. But this is also really a workshop. So after the two keynotes, it's going to really be hands-on work for us. We want to hear from you. We want to learn from you. We want to know what you think about open science and how open science should move forward. And especially that's what young scientists think about open science and what they want. So in 1 hour time, you will be divided into 8 breakout sessions, and that will give you an opportunity for discussion in smaller groups. And what we want to know is what the priorities are, what are our recommendations to UNESCO that they then can take to the different ministries globally. And it's important to think about, in terms of what is really the most important thing that we want to advocate for, but also really think in terms of concrete and actionable steps. So basically, giving as a recommendation to make science better or something, it's obviously too vague to really have an impact. So we really need to think about what is a recommendation that will have the most impact and will move forward open science in the best way possible for us. Now, if you don't want to join these breakout discussions, or for instance, if you are in a setting in which you cannot really talk yourself, it may be good then to leave the meeting just after the keynote speeches and before the breakouts, because with the breakouts, the groups will be assembled in a certain way. And I will make a short announcement when that will be. And of course, even if it's the purpose to gather the perspective of young scientists, of course, also senior people that are attending, senior scientists or stakeholders can, of course, also really take place in the discussion. That is not an issue at all. So you're very welcome. Everyone is really welcome to join our discussions. It's just like, if you already know I'm not going to be available for that part, it is best to log out basically just after the keynote so that we can correctly create the breakouts. Okay, and then a second point, it's really an etiquette point. In the GYA, we really try to make our discussions not reactive or aggressive. We really try to work together constructively, and we have certain ways to do that, as I'm sure our members and alumni know very well. So we try to use phrases like "how might we" instead of like directly going into opposition with your partner, or instead of saying "yes but," we try to say "yes and" to show a different perspective on the discussion. It's also important to be mindful of others. And so make sure that others get also the opportunity to speak during the breakouts, and to be mindful of time, because we have a very full agenda, as Anna already mentioned. And so it is important to keep on schedule. You have already seen the etiquette on the page when you entered the room, at least most of you. Maybe Kirsten, if you can also paste again the technical etiquette in the chat, then people can just double check again about how this will work on the technical side. Now, if something happens, like if we are Zoom bombed, or if something kind of some harassment or something like that happens, because this is an open meeting, we cannot fully control what will happen. You're advised to leave the meeting as soon as possible, and we will try to reach you with an email and send you a new link so you can connect again in a different Zoom. But I'm sure that everything will go well. I mean, this is a community of young scientists, and we're all very much looking forward to contributing in a positive way. So I'm very much looking forward to a fruitful conversation with all of you. So this is, I think, the moment when we can move to our first section with two speakers. And the first speaker is Simon Chaplin. Simon is Director of Culture and Society at the Wellcome Trust and the future CEO of Arcadia. And at the Wellcome, Simon has been doing great work in relation to the library and the museum, and also cultural aspects of medicine. But he has been, I think that's also very important for GYA members, he has been very interested in diversity and inclusivity, which is really at the core of what we are as a GYA. And he has been very active on open research. And I think in his future role also, he will work even more on open access and open research. So we're very much looking forward to listening to your presentation, Simon. We will have time for questions and answers, but because of, like, for the moment, we will keep everything muted, and participants are invited to basically send me the questions in the chat, and then I will ask the questions directly to Simon. So for the moment, we will proceed like that. And so people can already start chatting questions during Simon's talk. That makes it even easier to have something interactive. And I'm looking forward to listening to you speak, Simon.
Thank you very much indeed. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
So it's a pleasure to be with you virtually, at least, and fantastic that we're able to connect this way. As we said at the start, there are advantages as well as disadvantages to this kind of gathering, and in terms of equitable access, perhaps there is a thing to be learned here. So greetings to you all. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to you. As you've heard, my name is Simon Chaplin. I'm the Director of Culture and Society at the Wellcome Trust. For those of you who don't know Wellcome, we're an independent foundation with a mission to improve health for everyone by helping great ideas to thrive. We're based in London in the UK, and the majority of the 14,000 or so researchers we support either based in or linked to UK universities. But increasingly, Wellcome as an organisation is taking an interest in supporting research globally and trying to deliver health outcomes globally as well. We are known by many people as being primarily a biomedical research funder, and health is at the heart of our mission. But we also support research across humanities and social science. So when I talk about science today, I'm not talking about science in a narrow sense, I'm talking about research in the broad sense. And I think it is important that when we talk about delivering solutions for open access, open science, open research, we aren't thinking of them as being discipline-specific solutions. They have to be ones that work across all kinds of research. Wellcome's also known, as Koen said, for its work in arts and culture, for supporting public engagement, and increasingly for our work supporting diversity and inclusion and research culture, which goes beyond just the creation of an inclusive research environment, but also thinks more openly about what it means to be trustworthy when it comes to research. Now, I'm going to be leaving Wellcome later this year to take up this new role at Arcadia. Arcadia is another charitable fund set up by Elizabeth Rousing and Peter Baldwin. It also has an interest in open access, so this won't be something I leave behind me when I go to Arcadia, but today I'm speaking purely on behalf of Wellcome. And Wellcome's had a long-standing commitment to open access, data sharing, and open research. We've taken this recent interest in research culture, recognizing that many of the challenges, particularly when it comes to the global implementation of open science, are not simply about technical solutions or about policies or about developing new practices, but they speak to the heart of what research should be. Now, there are lots of definitions of open science. The one we've worked with at Wellcome defines it as the practice of science in such a way that others can collaborate and contribute, where research data, lab notes, articles, code, materials, the other research processes are freely available, and under terms that enable their reuse, redistribution, and reproduction of the research and its underlying data and methods. Now, this definition includes what we have traditionally defined as open access, making research outputs findable and accessible. That is, without barriers, not just to readers and to users, but also without barriers to authors. But when we talk about openness, it isn't simply about being findable and being accessible. It also needs to be interoperable, so that the materials we make available openly are in formats that they can be used in a collated manner, that we can gain something from a shared endeavor. And they have to be reusable, so we can subject them to processes that allow us to extract additional value from them, rather than thinking we see each item in isolation. So activities like data mining, text mining, for example, have to be permitted. So for this reason, when we talk about open science, we take at the heart of it what we've called the FAIR principles, F-A-I-R, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And these are our foundation stones. Now, Wellcome's done a lot of work with different organizations. In the longer version of this talk, which will be available online, I can talk about our initiatives such as Europe PubMed Central, the Global Biodata Coalition, and Coalition S. And this may be a thing we want to return to in the Q&A. But I want to focus here very briefly on this idea of the FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and why they aren't enough in and of themselves. So we can talk of FAIR as an acronym for these four things, but we also have to talk about fairness itself as a principle. So we will only succeed in making science open globally if we approach it as a collaborative and equitable process. Being fair in this context does not mean that everyone has the same opportunity. It recognizes we start from a position of global research inequity. Open science, therefore, to succeed, has to level up the research ecosystem. Now, this is why when we talk about policies and principles and platforms, we shouldn't see them as technical interventions, but as ways of challenging what we mean by excellence in research and defining what we think an excellent and equitable research culture can look like. So open science requires us to recognize and reward the full range of outputs that constitute our work, not just research articles, but data sets, software, protocols, and materials. In that sense, open science contains within it the potential to recognize a variety of work that isn't always recognized in a conventional research ecosystem. Open science must go further than that, though, to recognize and reward the work that goes into the research process, data collecting, field work, the work that underpins laboratory operations, not just the data analysis. And further still, it should recognize the often hidden labor that lies behind equitable science, mentoring, coaching, juggling caring responsibilities, managing disabilities and chronic conditions, dealing and hopefully challenging racism and other forms of ingrained discrimination. These are also kinds of work that take place within the research ecosystem, but they're not kinds of work that are traditionally recognized and rewarded when it comes to things like grant success rates or promotion opportunities or security of tenure. So we have to recognize this hidden labor. And open science, therefore, is much, much more than just open access. We can talk about open access and how we make open access itself a more equitable process. And I welcome some of the thoughts from the Global Young Academy on what criteria we need to build in to open access in order to make it more equitable. But we also have to go beyond that and say, how can we start to redefine research culture? And for research funders, organizations like Wellcome, this is where collaboration becomes essential. Wellcome as a research funder can't dictate research culture. Nor can we define research culture just by talking to the researchers that we fund, because they're the ones who've succeeded under the current system. They're the ones who have access to research funding, grant funding. And I would say globally, the majority of research is done by researchers who haven't received a particular research grant. They're doing it through their salaries, they're doing it in other ways. So we shouldn't think of research as purely a grant-funded activity, and therefore as grant funders as holding the key. But what grant funders like Wellcome can do is to start to understand what researchers themselves, particularly early career researchers, are looking for in terms of an equitable research culture. We can absorb those ideas and we can then reflect them back in the processes that we put in place, so that when we make decisions about grant funding, for example, about who we support, how we support them, and where we support them, we're starting from a base of what matters to researchers globally, not just to a select few, and with a principle of equity. How do we make sure that everyone has the same chance of success, not simply equality? I think the Global Young Academy has a critical role here, because you bring together the voices and experiences of early career researchers around the world and across disciplines. Through Coalition S, we're very pleased to be working with the Academy on the Monitor Task Force, but I think we would like to go beyond this to start thinking globally about what an equitable research culture looks like, one that goes beyond those FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, when it comes to defining open science, and instead thinks of what open science itself looks like as a fair and equitable process. That's all I'm going to say for now. I hope that's given a spark for some conversation and some discussion, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your ideas and your questions. Thank you, Koen.
Great. Thank you so much, Simon. So if the participants have questions, please chat them to me, and I will read them out to Simon directly. In the meantime, Simon, obviously I have lots of questions for you. I think that's also fine that I ask you a question. So, I mean, the GYA has been already involved with Wellcome and Coalition S, so we're working together, but we still have like some questions about that procedure. For instance, Coalition S wants to go global. It's mainly European funders. It's broader. We know that. And I think it's great and very necessary that the coalition goes global. But of course, at the same time, going global is not easy because there's local differences, national differences, and there's sometimes also like an issue of national sovereignty. Like people say, like, well, we have our own rules and we don't need to be part of a coalition. So, can you give us some advice? What is your position on how can we best overcome this kind of, well, basically the tension between like the national and the global here?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think what I would say is I recognize that as a quality of Coalition S, and I think I would be honest, I see it as an unhelpful quality of Coalition S. It originated in Europe, it has grown out, but it's grown out across a network of established research funders. And the question for us as a coalition is, how do we become more inclusive. And what I would say there is actually one of the strengths of Coalition S is that we have defined a set of core principles for what we are trying to achieve. And we have defined some rules about what we think we need to do in order to achieve a mass transformation of academic publishing. But within that, there are a number of routes for doing it. And we recognize that the routes that may be suitable for some funders or in some national contexts may be unsuitable for other funders and other national contexts. And I think that's critical, not just to the success of Coalition S, but to all of these collaborative movements, is we try and hold the core principles, what we're trying to achieve together, tight, narrow, and simple. And around that, allow the flexibility for organizations to interpret and deliver in different ways, sometimes recognizing that national or disciplinary contexts, for example, might be quite different. So the principles for Coalition S are that research should be freely available, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and that it should be freely available from the point of publication without delay. But within that core principle, doing it through a green route, for example, using an author-accepted manuscript, or doing it through a gold route with an article processing charge, two very different approaches, but both equally compliant. There are other approaches too, which are about how the journals themselves or publishers might transform their work. And those different routes, I think, should mean that over time, we can develop approaches to Coalition S, which hold to those core principles, but work in different contexts.
So thank you, Simon. I have lots of questions coming in on the chat here, so I'm happy to field them to you. I think we have about 10 minutes time for the Q&A. So yeah, I guess we will try to manage as many questions as we can within that time. Great. So here's a question by Lisa Herzog to asking you about your position on author publishing fees, because of course that's also a big concern for some of the scholars and especially young researchers.
Yeah, so I don't think authors should ever be put in the position where they have to pay from their own funds in order to publish their research. I think it is possible sometimes, and Wellcome is an example, where funders may want to pay as part of a research grant or in addition to a research grant to allow a particular route for publication. But there should always be routes for publication which are open to authors, allow them to publish in the venue of choice and don't require them to pay, and still achieve the ambitions of, in our case, Coalition S. So I think what we would say is that in that process, publishers shouldn't be taking rights away from authors to restrict access to their work, but balancing the value they create as publishers with the right of the author to make their work available. And the green route within Coalition S allows exactly that. It recognizes that the author-accepted manuscript is the version that gets made available and shared and satisfies the conditions of Coalition S. The final print version, the published version, may be available under a different license or through a subscription. But the point is that the author-accepted manuscript is available, and that provides a route for any author to publish and to have their work available open access without having to pay upfront.
Great, thank you, Simon. I mean, of course, we could continue on many of these questions, but we have a very nice diversity of questions. So I will move to the next one by David Fernandez Rivas. How can we have a peer review system that is really of top quality, but without falling into some kind of a business system? And so where should scientists put their efforts? And I guess also in the phase of like an increasing volume of publication.
Yes, well, it's been very interesting actually seeing this in the context of COVID. So before COVID, we already were developing solutions. Wellcome has an F1000 platform called Wellcome Open Research. Gates have one. I know that GYA are involved in the European initiative based on F1000 as well, which allows for open peer review. So articles are submitted, made available, and the peer review is done openly. I think there are increasingly models which recognize that getting research available and conducting the peer review openly may be a better way of managing that flow from submission through to publication than the conventional model, where an article is submitted and then 6 months, 12 months later, peer review comes back, and sometimes you're asked for revisions or for additional work. That clearly doesn't work in a period of health crisis. And the question is, well, can we learn from how research publishing has worked during the pandemic to say, are there lessons we can apply then for research in future? I think there are other roles for peer review too. So at the moment, peer review is an uncosted labour for the most part. And I think there are models for learned societies, for example, to think how might they apply the expertise that they have within their society in different ways, rather than their members simply contributing, often to commercial publishing models with unpaid labour.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question is about FAIR, but also the FAIR principles, but also the expansion of FAIR to fairer, which you sometimes hear, and especially the question is about the E in the FAIR. Where does ethics come into your vision of open science?
Where does ethics come in, did you say?
Right.
Yeah. So I think for me, one of the functions of open science is that it's open across society. And I know it's one of the recommendations, one of the points that was picked up in the GYA report, which recognises that actually most research outputs are not presented in a way that makes them immediately accessible, readable to non-specialist audiences. So I think that kind of reflects the broader need for us to think about what ethical research looks like, not simply in the way in which research is done, but the way in which it's positioned in society. And that, I think, contains within it both obligations on researchers in how they communicate their research, how they engage with others, how they frame the ethics around their research practices, but also recognises the work that goes into that and includes that work in how researchers are assessed when it comes to their careers, their grant funding, the other decisions which affect how they progress through a research hierarchy. So for me, I think the extension of FAIR to fairer is important, but linked to it is this idea of recognising the work that goes into that and making sure that's rewarded in people's career progressions.
Great, thank you. Well, I forgot to say that the previous question was by Moritz Rieder, and the next one is by Nova Ahmed, and that question is about how can we ensure that all the voices are heard? Because there is a large variation of engagement among researchers, also between different regions, and also between different platforms in which we can basically voice our opinions and views. So how can we basically gather these different opinions?
That's a very good question, and I don't have a simple answer for it. So when Wellcome launched its research culture initiative last year, we opened it up to an online survey and online dialogue. But of course, what we got were responses mostly from people who were already in some way within Wellcome's orbit. So it was a good sample, it was a useful sample, but in that sense, it was a fundamentally biased sample. I would say as a research funder, one way in which we do it is by reaching out to those organisations which are already seen and trusted by groups of researchers. So the National Academies, the Global Young Academy, but also disciplinary associations, so learned societies, but other kinds of associations. And I think what we're looking for in each of them is organisations which are themselves responsive to the views and experiences of their members or of their constituencies, rather than organisations which are led top down by, for example, a commercial imperative, or sometimes a not-for-profit imperative, but with a very clear mission. So I think the decision we have to take is we can only do it by working in partnership with others. We can't do it by simply trying to reach out to people individually because we end up with a biased sample, but in looking for capable partners, we have to look carefully at how they are trusted and how they are trustworthy, their members and their constituencies.
Okay, great. Thank you for including GYA here.
I'll let the GYA members decide whether you fall into that category. I'm not going to make that judgment.
Good. So we have another question by Abdullah, who is one of our strong open science advocates and is also very interested in peer review. And he's asking also about discussions around Plan S that in some way push back or are perceived sometimes to be encroaching upon other local initiatives that locally work very well. But then suddenly there is this kind of global initiative that comes along that seems to kind of create problems and disturb the equilibrium. And in particular in Latin America, as I'm sure you know, with America and other platforms that seem to be working pretty well for Latin America. So how do we think about that tension?
I would prefer to recognize the tension and then to address it by saying that an organization like Coalition S can't be seen as imperialistic or colonial in its approach. We end up repeating the mistakes of the past. So where there are already effective national, regional, in some cases global initiatives that can sit alongside something like Coalition S that achieve the same aims but maybe do it through a different route, I would like those things to be seen as complementary and not to be competing. I would hope that over time we can look at ways of converging, and that may require change, but it shouldn't be seen as it has to be change on one side only. If in order to bring two coalitions together, both of them need to change, then that should be up for consideration. At the moment, I think from a Coalition S perspective, I would want to make sure that we're sure in ourselves what we're trying to do. And I think it is useful in building a coalition not to throw it open too broadly, too quickly, and to end up with a mess of competing priorities. But I wouldn't want it to become monolithic. And I think a challenge for the Coalition S leaders group in particular will be to ensure they don't start to think of themselves as a monolithic force when it comes to global approaches to open access and open science.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you're absolutely right about the potential danger of neocolonialism here, which is sometimes being mentioned in the context of open science, and that we need to be very mindful of that.
And kind of I can say, so the Johan Roerich, who works on behalf of Coalition S and acts as a kind of global ambassador for us, is very sensitive to that issue. And I think has been very keen to look at what others are doing and to bring that perspective back to Coalition S, rather than being as somebody who has to go out simply as an evangelizer for what Coalition S is doing.
Mm-hmm. Right. I have another question about, well, one of the problems that open, especially gold open access, has sparked is predatory journals. So how do we solve that, and how do we ensure quality in the system?
I think the first thing, actually, I think, is that last point: how do we ensure quality? And one of the issues that we see at the moment is a focus on quantity over quality, both in research practice, but also research assessment. So part of this is helped by actually saying, what are we trying to drive for? Are we trying to drive for an ever-growing body of research outputs year on year? Or should we be saying we want to drive for a smaller number, but perhaps a higher quality and more impactful number of research outputs? That goes back to the heart of research culture, because if people are being measured for success on quantity rather than quality, then the pressure is always going to be on them to publish and to succeed. I think it also requires equitable access to authors. So if authors feel that the only way they can get published is to pay, and that's been legitimated by a gold system, then that reinforces the model that by definition, in some ways, paying to publish feels like a good thing. That's what allows predatory journals to thrive. If we support equally the green route, and that's also supported by journals, then that takes some of that pressure away, that people can still publish in a journal that doesn't require an APC, that would allow them to meet the objectives of open access, then I think that removes that pressure. That requires change in existing journals. And I think the failure of many existing journals to change is what's allowed some predatory publishers to move into a space and to try and occupy it.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate because obviously we do have green and gold right now, but we still have predatory journals, so it's not immediately fixed. And maybe, I mean, also from the Global Young Academy, we kind of favor a route that you haven't really mentioned, which is the diamond route, where, well, which yeah, sometimes at some point also the different colors don't make sense anymore, but where basically, yeah, it's a bigger institutional effort to make sure there is enough infrastructure for publishing, and well, that could be maybe also another way. Maybe quickly a last question. So the previous question was by Syed Abbas, and the next one is by Srinjoy Mitra. And his point is, I think, a very, very important one, is that, well, in the end, still very few researchers are actually passionate about open science. Everyone here in the call probably is, and we're all very interested to talk and listen to you. But how do we convince really the broader community that this is important? So very quick answer, because then we need to move forward. But thank you in advance for that.
So when there's change, some people are enthusiastic about change and they want to make change, and other people they just want to follow the rules. So the answer is you change the rules, because those people who are not enthusiastic, they're still following rules at the moment. If you change the rules, they'll follow the new rules. So I think the way you do that is by changing the research ecosystem and making this the new normal. And then for people who just want to do what everybody else does, that's fine. They're doing open science.
Okay, interesting perspective. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Simon, for your contribution here. I mean, I would love that everyone can applaud. I think we have a reactions button where actually we can applaud for you, which is nice. So thank you for joining our group and for your presentation and your answers to all our questions.
And thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you all for the questions.
Great. So I think also in terms of time, it's important to move immediately to our next keynote speaker, which is Persic, who you already very briefly heard to start the session. And Anna will be talking about the UNESCO recommendations in a bit more detail than she did before. The floor is yours, Anna. Oh, you need to unmute.
Thank you very much, Koen, and many thanks to Simon. It was really interesting, and I think just this relatively short discussion gives us a lot of flavor as to how important open science is as really a different way of doing science, and as a way that probably science will be in the future. And it's an exciting time, because I feel like we are all collectively here building that new science of the future as well. But let me say a few words about where UNESCO is coming from when we talk about open science, and then a little bit more about the open science recommendation, which is this global consensus that we are trying to build, including through developing of this normative instrument. And then also, what are the inputs that we would like to receive from the Global Young Academy and young scientists around the world. So I'll share my screen. I should just be able to find it. Just a second. Okay. I'm not sure if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it all right, Anna.
Perfect. So I'm going to continue with the slides. So as I said, I would like to give you a little bit of an indication of why we do have open science in UNESCO and where we are coming from. Well, first of all, as we said, UNESCO is the United Nations organization that is promoting, of course, responsible for science, education, and communication, and promoting this new way of science that is more responsive to society, science that is more transparent, maybe in the way the input and the outputs are given, and science that is a little bit more maybe beneficial to the societies around the world, is really in the core of our mandate. So open science really is one of the ways that we see that that science can reach its potential really of helping meeting the needs of people around the world, and also advance our collective knowledge of our universe. Also because, as you all know, science, the United Nations has this global agenda, which is the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And it has 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And we have, of course, seen that science, technology, innovation is really the fundamental tool that we have to reach these Sustainable Development Goals. But it feels like we are not there yet. It feels like we can do more to ensure that the knowledge, technologies, innovations that are produced by science, scientific enterprise, and the scientific process, we're still not in the position of using it as much as we could to actually reach these Sustainable Development Goals. So knowing that we now have 10 more years to go, and we are starting this decade of Agenda 2030 to really galvanize actions around different governments in the process for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Again, we see open science there as a very interesting mechanism and tool to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. Open science with different principles that actually Simon very nicely and eloquently talked about is also for us a way of making sure that the human rights to science is achieved as well. So we do know, and we have been talking about it, particularly with the Global Young Academy, about the human rights to science and how important it is that people can benefit from advances in science. And we do see open science also in that light, and that is that it does have the potential to ensure that we meet that human right to science. And then finally, because UNESCO does have the normative power to bring some of these global issues together and ensure that we have some normative instruments at the global level that would give the framework and provide advice and guidance to member states in the way they develop their policies, strategies, or other instruments to reinforce or to move forward with some of these questions, including that of open science. So as I said, we're not starting from scratch from the past few years. We actually do have our strategy on open access to scientific information and research since 2011. Of course, the UNESCO Recommendation on Science and Scientific Researchers, which has been adopted in 2017, and I think we have a colleague who is very much working on the recommendation, April Tash, who is also with us here today. This recommendation has several inputs on open science and several references to open science. And actually, when we did this preliminary study about whether there is a need for an additional open science or additional recommendation on open science, we did realize that while the 2017 recommendation gives some references to open science, it does not go in details or in depth as much as it's needed at this stage to be able to build this global consensus of what open science is and what needs to be done to make sure that it is implemented or that it moves forward in a way that indeed is fair and equitable. From our point of view, we do see open science, of course, as a movement or as a process, as Simon was saying, and it does influence all the different parts of the scientific process. So it's not just in the way we collect or share data, it's also the way we come to a hypothesis or do peer reviews or publish, distribute, use the information. So really open science is a way to transform science and making it more open in a way at each and every step of the way of the process of the scientific enterprise. And again, from our point of view, what we really want to see is that influence goes in the direction of making science more beneficial for all, and a tool to reach this United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As Simon was also saying, of course, open science is about open access, it is about open data, but it's much more than that. Besides the fact that we have so many different elements, open infrastructures, open educational resources, open labs, open notebook, open innovation, we also have this part on open to society, basically. And that involves how do we bring in citizen science, how do we talk about benefits to society more broadly, how do we ensure inclusiveness of science, how do we ensure also that we have contributions and that we have the gender equity and equality and in the scientific process. So all of these issues somehow need to be brought together under the open science umbrella. And for the moment, what we've seen is that the issues have been dealt with slightly in a fragmented way and very much in isolation and in different communities, and we didn't yet see really the something that would bring all of these different elements and issues under the same umbrella. Another thing that is extremely important from the UNESCO point of view, and it's been said also by Simon, so it was very good to hear that from you, Simon, is that the science technology innovation gap is still there. So we really do have differences in science technology innovation for all the different indicators between different countries, between different regions, and also within different countries. So really, while we build an open science movement, or while we implement this transition in different countries, one really needs to be mindful of the fact that open science has to be a tool to reduce these gaps and cannot be a tool that will actually further enlarge those gaps. And I think when we are particularly talking to countries from the South, I think their biggest fear is that some of the open access, some of the open science practices are such that actually they might increase this gap in science technology innovation, and the idea really is to decrease the gap. So that's why it's so important to work together in this regard. So we have seen in past years all these different initiatives, policies, strategies coming up with regards to open science in different countries, in different institutions, in different ways. But for the moment, we don't really have a global umbrella for the open science. We don't really have a common definition. We don't really have a common definition of what the values and the principles are. And we still operate in a very fragmented scientific and policy environment when it comes to open science. And as it was said before, it is particularly important to create something that brings together all these different views, particularly when we move from local to regional and then to global initiatives. And that is basically why our member states, the UNESCO member states, have asked UNESCO to develop a standard setting instrument on open science in the form of a UNESCO recommendation on open science. So what is a UNESCO recommendation? There is a little bit of a confusion sometimes because people feel like it's just a set of recommendations that we give to governments, but it is actually a legal instrument in which our General Conference formulates principles and norms for the international regulation of a given matter, and then invites member states to take legislative or other steps to basically apply those principles and norms in their respective territories. So it is basically the recommendations in this sense are are intended to influence the development of national laws and practices. And with the conventions, it's another legal instrument that the organization has to be able to influence, as I said, the development of national laws and practices in its fields of expertise. And in this particular case, that is in the field of science. So it's a legal instrument. It's extremely important that as such, it is, it's realistic, and it really does reflect the reality that one can see in different parts of the world, so that then it can be applied in different countries, adapted to the specific context with the help of the rest of the community, including the international community. So what we've been asked basically, and when I say we, it's actually we collectively, including all the different stakeholders, is really to come up with this recommendation in a very inclusive way, to make sure that we talk to all the different stakeholders, to all the different regions, to understand where different stakeholders, as I said, and regions are coming from. What are the key challenges? What are the key opportunities? What do they intend by open science? What are the key needs in different places, to be able to come up with this ensemble of shared values and principles, and then actions, concrete actions also, as Koen was saying, for governments to implement or to move forward with some of the actions. So again, it was very interesting to hear also from Simon about this need to really take into account and develop principles for open science in and out of itself. Fairness, as he was saying, or other things, collaboration, equity, and other principles for open science. We really are keen on understanding what these principles and shared values are at the level of open science as a movement. We have 2 years to develop the recommendation. So it started in November 2021 with this decision, 2020, sorry, with this 2019, with the decision of the General Conference to start the process. And the text, the final text, is supposed to be adopted by our member states in November 2021. And so in this 2-year process, I think we have a few parts. One is really to gather all the inputs, to understand who the different stakeholders are, to map all the different actors in all the different regions, to get as much contributions as possible. Then to have these consultations like this one with the Global Young Academy and the Young Scientist community. We also have consultations in different regions for different themes. And then there is a part where there is actually the drafting of the text and the another round of comments from the different from the entire community on the draft text. But then, let's say from April on, the text of the recommendation is then in the hands of member states, who negotiate it among themselves and then come up with a text. Then hopefully they will be able to adopt in November 2021. In terms of process and how it's organized, we have an Open Science Advisory Committee, which has just been set up by the Director General. We're building an open science partnership, reaching out to different actors, including the Global Young Academy, to have this partnership to rely on when we tackle some of the issues, not just to develop the recommendation, but also then once we start implementing the recommendation, that we can rely on these partners also to help us in the implementation. And then, of course, this open science community of practice that we're trying to build across the world. In terms of timeline, this is a little bit the timeline that we had. As I said, the first part is really gathering all the different inputs from different sources. The second part is having these consultations, drafting the text, and then comments on the text, and then the draft text really goes to the member states in April for their consideration and negotiation for adoption in November 2021. So what we've done so far, we've launched this global online consultation in March this year. The official deadline was 15th of June. We're still keeping it open for a few next days. So for those who have not filled the consultation survey yet, you still have a few days to go. But we are also receiving inputs from international and regional entities and all the different relevant stakeholders, I mean written inputs, because from the beginning there were some entities like the International Science Council or the Global Young Academy which said we have many different members and we actually want to bring their views together and provide you an input to your consultations and to your draft recommendation that already reflects our own internal consultation and our own internal thinking. So we have now received many different written inputs as well, which is really interesting. It gives all kinds of different perspectives, and they're coming both from the international organizations, but also from regional ones. And those like the Global Young Academy or the Global Citizen Science Partnership that kind of bring together a specific stakeholder group in a way and present their views as well. We will have a set of regional consultations from July to October. I think the one in July is now set for the 22nd, and then the other regions have their own consultations later on in the year. And Global Young Academy will of course be, and its different members will be invited to be part of those consultations as well. We have some national consultations. These are member states who decide to do their own internal consultations as well. And then we have this thematic or stakeholder meetings where different stakeholders come together to consult and to discuss what the best inputs would be for our process, like this open science workshop that you are having today. And again, we are extremely pleased to see that, because it's very important to get a young scientist perspective into what we are trying to achieve here. So in terms of some of the reflections that we would like to see, or some of the inputs from your discussion, is really, what are your views on what open science is? What are the different elements of open science? What is its scope? Who are the actors? How do we take them into account? Of course, as I said, guiding principles for open science is really something that we are looking into. I think it's going to be very important, because there is a lot of expectations for the recommendation to really set out the principles and shared values for what open science is. Opportunities, challenges, incentives, infrastructure and capacity needs. What are the collaboration, networking needs, financial considerations, possible policy recommendations, and then best practice and lessons learned. So there's a lot that I'm putting there for you, but I'm sure that with this good group that we have today, and also the other members that you have consulted before and after this meeting, we will be able to get something from young scientists that will be extremely helpful for our process. So I'm gonna stop here, and then I'm here also to respond to your questions as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna, for this presentation. We already have some questions in the chat, so that's fantastic, but people can still add more questions to ask to Anna. I'll switch on my video. But I maybe, again, I will start with a question, Anna, to you. Because I'm wondering, like, how can we be most impactful as young scientists, basically to influence the process and to get our voices heard? And in particular, what is the level of our recommendations that would be best? Because, I mean, yeah, you talked about norms and principles, and I also think that is very important. But then, if basically UNESCO sends to the ministers like, well, science needs to be more equitable, I guess that is not actionable enough for them to do something with that, right? So I'm just wondering, like, what would be the ideal level of our input?
Great. So definitely, as you said, actionable recommendations is always something that is extremely useful. At the same time, it cannot be too specific, because we are talking about a kind of an upper level of standard setting. So we really are in standard setting and norms. And so one needs to to think in this higher perspective, let's say, or in this bigger perspective, which does not mean that you will not necessarily have some concrete recommendations to make. But these are recommendations that have to be broad enough so that they can be understood by all the member states, including those who, for example, do not have a science, technology, innovation ministry. So this is, it can be very, and it is challenges to formulate these type of recommendations. But I think also what is interesting in this process is that, and we've seen it with the inputs that we are receiving, different groups from different regions or different disciplines or different stakeholders group, they do come from a different point of view when they start working on open science. So their recommendations actually reflect that as well. And for the moment, we are in a place where we want to see all those reflections. So whatever level of detail or non-detail you want to put forward, now is the time to do that. Because as you said, there are different moments to influence the process. For the moment, what we need is input, as much as possible, understanding what is out there, where people are coming from, and what is their level of understanding of what open science is and what it should be, right? There will be a second stage where you will have a draft text and the possibility to comment on the draft text. So the draft text is going to be done based on all these different inputs. It's not something that you know, somebody is working on somewhere independently of the inputs that we are receiving. The whole point was to get all these inputs, try to digest them as much as possible, put them in a first draft, and then provide everybody the possibility to comment again. So that's going to be a level where it's going to be a little bit more specific in terms of exactly what, you know, then you can put into that. Then of course, you know, a Global Young Academy, National Young Academies that are also part of the Global Young Academy, you can also influence the process through your governments. So sooner or later, this is all part of an intergovernmental process. And you are part of, you know, the stakeholders in the different governments. So there is also a way of influencing the recommendation and its the text through the governments, depending how the governments will then decide to like Germany. We just yesterday they're organizing a series of webinars. They're already gathering some input, and they will do something very inclusive. Some other countries might do something different, but I feel like as young scientists, particularly those who are part of Global Young Academy, so already engaged in this science policy interface in a way, that's another step. To do. And then, of course, the third part is also, once the recommendation is there, to really pick up on some of these things and then bring it forward and work on it as well. As I said, or I didn't say, but the thing with the recommendation, what is really interesting, it's not as legally binding as a convention, but it does have an evaluation and monitoring system. So countries do have to report back to UNESCO as to what they have done compared to what they have agreed to do in the recommendation. So they will have to report back. And this is also where Global Young Academy has a role to play. And then another thing, sorry, and I forgot about that. We have the advisory committee, as I said, and it hasn't been officially announced yet, but I think I can just tell you that there is a representative of Global Young Academy who is there. And we will share the name probably right after this meeting. It just has to be officially announced. And you know, that's also a person to whom maybe you may wish to talk to, you know, in advance of the advisory committee meetings, and share some of your thoughts with him as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. So we have a number of questions here in the loop, and I will start here with a, well, now the question is disappearing in my chat. There's too many questions coming in. So a question by Clarissa Rios about if you can say something more about the strategies or mechanisms that we can use that can really influence the policymakers. And yeah, maybe a quick response, because we're getting a bit over time, but it would be great to have a bit more advice from you on that particular point.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the response I just gave in terms of how to influence this particular process gives a little bit of a flavor of how more broadly Global Young Academy can influence policy processes. I think it's very important to try to engage at a national level or the regional level. And there is more and more emphasis on including stakeholders in some of the policy processes, but still it's equally important to be proactive and to actually be able to have a say in the development of certain mechanisms of our policies. Now, of course, as I said, there are certain countries that already have mechanisms in place that pull together, in particular, views and opinions from young scientists whenever there is some kind of SDR or science or research policy or strategy being put in place. Others don't, but there is a science technology ministry or another way to interact with the governments and understand what the best mechanism is to try to influence the policy. As I said, unfortunately, we don't have a one-fit-all, reply to that. One really needs to try to understand what are the mechanisms in his or her country. Your institutions, how are they part of some kind of other advisory body mechanism or other type of mechanism that is set up in the country to get the views of stakeholders in developing policies or other instruments for moving forward on certain of these issues.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. We have more questions in the chat, but I think we also need to go forward with the working group to achieve our aims of really getting like a more one-to-one conversations between all the participants on open science. Just to clarify, of course, the GYA doesn't comprise the National Young Academies, but we do have this open science global working group that is indeed a collaboration of NYAs and the GYA to in particular move forward on open science and also help with creating this input for UNESCO and open science. So we're now ready for the breakouts, and so I promised you that those who will have difficulties really joining the breakouts, then I mean, this would be a moment to leave. I mean, we would be sorry to see you go, but in any case, thank you for joining us. And I think as many people as possible can stay here and actually really work together and discuss to provide UNESCO more insights about what young scientists actually think about open science and what they need. So this is the start of the interactive sessions. We will have 8 breakouts normally, and each of them will have different tasks, and they will be detailed in a Google Doc that you will get. So each breakout will have an assigned moderator, and they will start the discussion once the breakout is basically created from this general meeting. And so the moderator will share the Google Doc with all of you by pasting it in the chat. And there you can basically see the tasks and that will structure the discussion. So please read this short section carefully. And there are 2 important steps at the start of a breakout, and that is selecting a scribe, basically the one who will make notes in the Google Doc. So there is a record of what people have been talking about. And also a reporter who will then feed back to the General Assembly, the plenary meeting after the breakouts. And so that's also the idea that we are all coming back to the plenary after the different breakouts, and the reporter will basically have 3 minutes to report quite briefly, obviously, about what happened and the conclusions of the breakout. And in particular, we would like to have a few concrete recommendations that we can actually, well, maybe we need to edit them a bit more and synthesize them, but basically that will be the basis of some of the recommendations that we will be sending to UNESCO. So that is the plan, and I think from there we are we are more or less ready to be moved to the different breakouts. So you will have a time schedule also as part of the task list. Seems everyone should be back. So thank you very much for helping out and in thinking more about this in detail and also in exchanging with our UNESCO partners. I think everyone will have had a very different experience in their breakouts because the tasks were quite different. Sometimes it was a big task. Sometimes people were kind of more free to brainstorm about what they think some good recommendations could be. And I'm really looking forward to listening to some of the things that came out of the groups. We don't have too much time because we are a bit delayed already from the start. So I hope we can have quick presentations in the plenary about like two to maximal 3 minutes with your key recommendations, and I suggest we start immediately with that. So if like basically we will follow the order of the breakout, so from 1 to 7, and so the reporters, I hope they can keep ready for their turn and just kind of continue from the one to the other. So can the reporter for group 1 speak up?
Hello, everyone.
Yes, Lassen. Okay.
Lassen. So in our breakout session, we had discussions, interesting discussions about characteristics, principles, and stakeholders in open sciences. So I go directly to the points that we discussed, and we had a small list of the missing things in the section. And we talked also about, we saw that in the section there is a description of the digital revolution, and we discussed that there are previous revolutions that should be included, including human rights in the section. And in relation to the values of the open sciences, we discussed in particular the equity, and under equity we may want to discuss financing and sharing of benefits, as well as investment return, or working together as a global society for mutual benefit, overcoming the limitations of the opportunities by national borders, and to make the process more not exclusive and more inclusive, and to include also the UN SDGs and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the document. Also, we want that the document include also the limits or between the national investments in science and innovation, and in relation with the global development. Also to include the limitations between or the limits between academics and the science, entrepreneurship, and business world, because maybe if we as academics, we are defending the open science in some way, but the business world and innovation and entrepreneurship, they defend the protection, and because they want to protect their interests. So the document should discuss this point, the relation between academics and the business in this way. So as concrete recommendations, we came out with 3 main recommendations. The first one is related to the initiative, for example, that came out from the UNESCO. So, for example, international agencies like UNESCO and also other regional bodies, they should initiate a global conversation that helps to change to have this culture change in global science system. And in this discussion, we should acknowledge and ongoing that this process of the changing the culture, changing the global science system should be and recognize that it's an ongoing process and very dynamic and flexible, and that can adapt to different circumstances. And also to consider the sharing of benefits and supporting sustainable development, and to recognize differences in economic power between countries. And also, these agencies and discussions should empower and recognize young scientists as a key drivers of innovation. The second recommendation go to the academies and the national academies, regional academies, and young academies. They should play a role in recommendation in promoting young scientists to engage in open science initiative, and also they should initiate platforms and environment to collaborate internationally in publications and innovation. Also to give more, we repeat it again, to provide opportunities for young scientists to voice their opinions. And a third recommendation that is more practical and more concrete, that governments and the ministries and local funding agencies should have mandatory to have open science as a mandatory component in funding calls, and to push the scientists to publish data and the details from the results in platforms. And these platforms can be hosted or developed by international agencies, regional agencies, and also national agencies, and to invest more in this platform so the data can be available for anyone. So in this process also, the young scientists can be involved in making the science policies in order to have these platforms, and also to help in future in these calls, these funding calls that make open science mandatory. So this is all about what we discussed, and I hope they can help in developing and make a good contribution in the document.
Great, thank you so much, Dathin. We won't comment on your points now, but stay assured that they will be taken forward and taken up in our work towards our statement for UNESCO. Great. Who is going to present for the second group?
I'm going to present because in the end our group only left 2 members.
Okay.
Okay. So our group is on this benefits, challenges, and incentives. Of course, I think we all know a lot of these benefits on open science, but in order to implement it, there are a lot of challenges and actually written in the document, and we pay more attention to the incentives, where incentives have been proposed, but quite a number of incentives we feel that they are quite dangerous, and it can be also drive the whole ecosystem to another direction. We should be very careful on it. So our recommendation over here, the 3 recommendations that we pick up, the first one is this autos pay model in the open access should be discouraged immediately, because this actually have created quite increase the gap, like just now what Anna have mentioned, increase the gap. So we should look at those role model. I remember last time Martin had mentioned about in the UK, the Astronomical Society or something, they publish something for so long, but still in the no need to have this auto pay model. And of course, we understand that the private company like publisher, they are doing a business, but if it's hard for us to go to another extreme that we say that, okay, we don't need any private company on this open science platform. So maybe we can have some kind of different kind of incentive to them, like tax deduction or how to reduce their cost of operation, because definitely publications still need some cost of operation, including like you put a lot of data into the cloud, the server need to run under with energy. So the energy consumption, who is going to pay for the energy consumption? Then our second point is on this. Actually, UNESCO can play an important role like what we have seen on this climate action in the COP21, and then this SDG where every country have to follow. So whether these kind of things can be like the first part that we mentioned can be enforced or coordinated by UNESCO, so that it can be implemented in a quick way. And of course, like academia and NGO like us, we are doing from the bottom-up process, while UNESCO is doing on this top-down process, both in parallel. And then the last is we understand that this a lot of these open science are actually closely related to the how research is assessed. So these two things are always going parallel and influence each other. So if this top-down process can be also enforced in countries, so that this kind of like metrics that should not, those are not, I mean bad metrics should not be continue. And then we emphasize on principle on like more diversification and localized optimization. This can be done, mandate to the government or through the National Academy, where we feel that sometimes a lot of national academy should do something rather from the is to focus on their research on it. Yeah, this is our point.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Burhan. It's also good to hear from the incentives side. Who is going to report for Group 3?
Yeah, it's me, Despina Susoni from Group 3. Well, we had a very fruitful discussion. We had representatives from Asia, Africa, and Europe, and we discussed on the question, what are the needs to make open science possible? So we mainly discussed on infrastructures. So actually interoperable infrastructures that can cover different regions and disciplines, but also cover the different steps of science. So not only in the part of scientific publication, but also before on how we produce the data, and also what infrastructures are needed in the different steps, and how this can be described in the grant applications, for instance, because this should be also considered a big cost for the institutions to build these infrastructures, but also it means time and capacity, training of the people and everything. So it should be considered as a significant cost that all this building will have. Among these infrastructures is also very important the connectivity to the for the internet connectivity for the developing countries, and everyone to be in the same phase, let's say, and everyone to have access to the infrastructures and to internet in order to work on papers or download data and everything. So another point that we raised was citizen science. We need also to try to have infrastructures and engage with citizens, and that will not only happen top down, but also bottom up from the scientists. Nevertheless, we hope that this will cause a long-term positive benefit for science by maybe attracting more funding or attracting more interest for data production, for instance. Our last point, well, we had more than 3 points, but I thought to connect all of them together. The last point is about data and how is the availability of data accessible to everyone. What we saw important can be is that the data to be content sensitive and encrypted in some cases that maybe there is competition in the field in some specific topics. But also another issue is the ownership of the data and the legal framework that it will protect the scientists and the producers of data. And there is a problem of each country have different rules. So maybe piracy means something different for each country. So there is probably where we need the harmonization of legal protection of the ownership of data and data producers. Yeah, this was from our group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's great to hear the perspective from infrastructure and also data. So thank you, Despoina. Group 4, Clarissa.
Yes, we got 4 recommendations. The first one will be for developed countries to perhaps create a mechanism that facilitates open science in developing countries. For example, they could have a shared budget that can help to make translations of articles to local languages. For example, in Peru, maybe 10% speaks English. So there is a gap there. That budget could also be used for paying for the fees that usually you have to pay for open access. As I mentioned, for eLife is $2,500 if you want to have it open access. You can also make a book with open access papers that are printed and that can reach places where there is no technology or electricity or even internet. And that budget could also be to promote the exchange of researchers, and that's linked to the share of equipment and facilities, something that is already happening, for example, the Joint Research Center, where you can just go and use the facilities from time to time. The second recommendation will be to reform the system of academic rewards and to incentivize these practices. For example, to give more points for researchers that produce open access papers, or that do open lectures for citizens, or share their software or data. And this could help them when they have their promotion assessments. Also, funding organizations could also take these activities, consider these activities as part of the evaluation process. And let's remember that all these activities that I just mentioned are also very useful for engagement with policymakers. So this is something that many young scientists are doing nowadays, which is producing blogs, interviews, webinars. So that's very linked to the spirit of the GYA, and we think it should be recompensated or rewarded. We also need to shift away. We need to shift away from an author pay principle, whether or not the author pays for the articles. And the last recommendation will be that there should be some sort of guidance for researchers to learn how to protect and value their research, so they are able to choose how much they want to keep open and how much they don't. So it will be good to have like workshops or ambassadors that can mentor other researchers and explain what is good, what are the good reasons to keeping them open or not. Thank you, Koen.
Great, thank you, Clarissa. It's great to see like both kind of high level and very concrete proposals already there. Okay, and now, so these were groups on particular sections, and now we're going to like the more brainstorming groups that just were thinking broadly about recommendations. So group 5, who is going to talk for group 5?
I will. So I'm Ana Santos, and I'll be talking about the concrete recommendations that we discussed. So we talked about investing in infrastructure, education and training, and working on information dissemination. So regarding infrastructure, we think that we should consider as a factor of evaluations, both in academia and industry, that public funded research needs to be published in open access journals and platforms. And we should think of open science with community as a community of disciplines and reflect open science activities on like peer review and on scientist CVs. So as a recommendation, we recommend that open science activities published in open access journals, databases, open networks should indicate as an excellence science evaluation in evaluating jobs and grant allocations. Public funds and having a set of regulations. The second one was investing on education, internationalization and skills, as other groups also mentioned. So improving language and writing skills and training grad students, masters and PhDs and early career scientists through workshops and project deliverables. And as concrete recommendations, so invest in education and training, international engagement, writing and publishing skills in open science platforms for young and early career scientists, also by establishing international collaboration and facilitating engagement and adaptation of young scientists from developing countries. And the last was on societal perspective. So we should be open in different platforms, encourage change in mentality through different platforms, blogs, newspapers, and workshops. So increasing open science knowledge and awareness in societies using various platforms such as local newspapers, podcasts, workshops, in order to change perspectives on open science. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to see also the larger communication part as part of the recommendations. Thank you, Anna. Group 6.
Yeah, Prosper. I'm the one, Prosper Ngaunziza. I'm the one, representing group number 6. So we came up with 3 recommendations, and we structured them in what we call the 3 goals. And for each goal, we tried to give also a concrete action that should be followed. Yeah. Then for the first goal is training in open science, reproducible science for younger researchers. That is the first goal. As a concrete action, we propose that building training for open reproducible science into graduate programs. Like, for example, it is done for training in such methodology or scientific writing and reading. The idea being that the idea of open science is actually being trained to graduate students at earlier stage when they are starting their career. The second goal is not only open but accessible science. That is a two-way conversation between scientists and the society. The concrete action here is we recommend that, for example, through science academies, they can play a larger role in authentic communication with the public in collaboration with scientists or practitioners or other science communicators to communicate the results from science in a very understandable way to the society. Even here, for example, we can think of translating some science results in some mother tongues or different languages so that the society can actually get a meaning of what is happening in science. And also here, we also see that also the society communicating to the scientists, not only scientists communicating to society, but also society communicating to the scientists. Then there's a two-way communication. And the last goal is about reducing burden of publishing in open access journals. So the concrete action here is what we propose is create new journals that are truly open and make these journals accessible to publish in. The point being here, actually, these days when you want to publish open access, there is a cost involved for the one who is going to submit his paper from you. For example, your institution or some organization are going to cover your publication cost. Here we are proposing journals which are actually completely open. Then for this, they can be created, for example, through UNESCO can be support or UN or some EU fundings, they can be used to create this type of journals. Otherwise, we are creating imbalance where only those with funding can publish in the open access journals. So in summary, those are the 3 goals for our group. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Prosper. And I think now we're going to group 7.
Yep, group 7. I'm Munir Ahmed, reporting for group 7. We have discussed, initially we discussed a fundamental question, that is keeping intellectual property right and patenting there, can we really make science really open? So this is the question as a recommendation. We need to think that one, how much we can keep intellectual property and patenting option if we really want to make science open. We have to think about that one. Can we abolish intellectual property right and patenting to make science really open? That is the number one point. One of our members said that she didn't know about open science before attending this workshop. So we know this is the scenario throughout the world. So our recommendation is that we have to organize more workshop seminars to make the scientists aware about open science. This recommendation has come from some other groups. We also discussed that people don't see open science as a science of quality publication, especially. They think these are publication by payment. So whether there is foundation or not, we have to address this issue. We have to eliminate the misconception or perception of people so that scientists have good perception. Those who are publishing in open science, they are not deprived from promotion, as this type of publication is not seen as of high quality. So these are 3 recommendations for our group 7. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Monir. I think we had 7 groups, so we have listened to all the different recommendations. It's interesting to see quite some synergy between them, so that is great news. And in any case, I mean, we will make sure that the recommendations are taken on board when we develop more our perspective of young scientists to be shared with UNESCO. To finish our session, I would like to give the word quickly to Nova before we end, and then also to Anna, but to Nova to say maybe a few words about the global working group between the Global Young Academy and the NYAs that we started. Nova, are you there? Great.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity, Koen and UNESCO. Over a discussion in the worldwide meeting for young academies, open science came as a discussion topic. And it's interesting to see that different scientists in different disciplines and different regions have different requirements, what we wish to have from open science. And now we are in the moment where lots of changes are happening, lots of changes are needed. And this is the perfect time to look at us, look at ourselves. And we have scientists from developing regions, developed regions, scientists who have already worked with very great policies, scientists who do not have enough infrastructure or policy level support. And we have to set an example. This is our chance to set an example. That's what I think we have now. Individually, we are just like dots, but when we are all together, we can do a lot more. And as many of you already suggested, we can generate awareness, we can generate work, and together we can actually utilize the power of open science, open collaboration, open conferences, and probably open collaboration, and bring out the best and bring out the best hope we have, because we are losing it. Thank you very much. And I wish you stay connected with this initiative and support this initiative. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nova. Anna, do you want to say a few words before we...
I will just say a few words very briefly. Thank you very much for these discussions. It was really, really good. That's exactly what we were kind of looking for from a group like this, with a lot of very concrete operational, challenges that needs to be faced once one gets into open science, but also these inspirational ideas and a bigger picture that is kind of hopeful, and it brings us to something which is brighter in the future than what we have now. So it's really, really good. We are really looking forward to the consolidation of all these inputs. No pressure, Koen, but you know, in the coming days. And we really will continue the discussions. I mean, we are open to suggestions. We wanna keep this going. Think through, if we will have these regional consultations, we will get back to you through Koen to get representatives in different regions to definitely be part of those regional consultations. But if you feel also that in the different regions, particularly based on what you were saying, that there is still a low level of awareness about open science, if you wish to organize webinars like this, we would be in different regions, we would be very happy to be associated with that. And once we start, you know, having these conversations face to face, we can also think about how we can support you in that particular endeavor as well. So thanks again. We will definitely be in touch, and we are looking forward to all of your inputs.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. Yes, let's find the applause buttons. Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Thank you for everyone. I mean, this was an experiment also for us as a GYA. Normally, we apply these tools to our own membership, and we kind of build these kind of skills of communicating, discussing in little breakouts, and then coming up with results. We have started to do this now with a broader network of National Young Academies, and in this workshop, it's a public workshop, so many people who actually are not in a NYA or in the GYA have been able to attend and see how we work, and also we were able to listen to them and their concerns and their input. And so I think that was absolutely great. I mean, the GYA, our mission is to give a voice to young scientists, and I think in our own small way today, we have achieved that. And so I think this puts us on a great path forward, and we're looking forward to working with all of you in the future, and also to contribute to UNESCO's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye to all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.